Hello, everybody. Good morning, class. Okay, we're going to get started. Those lollygaggers over there, come on in. No, we're out. All right. Hi, everybody. I'm Mike Petrilli. I am the president of the Thomas B. Fordham Institute, which is a national education policy think tank. We also do on-the-ground work in the great state of Ohio, where we are an education reform advocacy group and a charter school authorizer. And I am super excited to get to moderate this panel. Charter schools are near and dear to my heart. I suspect you are here because they are near and dear to your heart, too. We all know the incredible impact that charter schools have had over the past 30 years now in American education. I think it's very clear that in terms of anything that has scaled, this is the reform with the strongest evidence behind it, especially urban charter schools, incredible impact on student achievement, but also as more and more studies come out on other important long-term outcomes, on college going, on college completion, on labor market earnings, on and on and on. And I'm also excited about this because in my job, I end up talking to reporters a lot, and there's this conception out there, misconception, I would say, that nobody cares about charter schools anymore. Right? You hear this a lot. Well, on the left, among Democrats, being in favor of charter schools is no longer popular. The unions have regained a lot of their power. There is unfortunately, some truth to that. And then on the Republican side, on the right, Republicans, all they care about are education savings accounts and private school choice, right? And that's where I think the misconception is. I mean, it's true that a lot of Republicans are excited about that. I'm excited about that. But it is not either or. In state after state, certainly in Ohio, and I bet in your states too, and in the states we're going to hear about today, there are legislators who continue to support great charter school policy, right? Where this is a priority. When charter school issues come up for a vote, there's support for improved facilities, financing, improved funding, right? Getting the balance right between autonomy and accountability and all the other issues we're going to talk about today. So I think it's really critical that the world knows that it is possible to keep pushing the frontier on school choice like education savings accounts do, but also still make sure that this charter school sector, which has shown itself to be so impactful, continues to grow and to succeed. And so that's what we're going to talk about here today. Okay, I am very lucky because we have a fantastic panel. And so they are the stars of the show. Let me briefly introduce you to them. First of all, Senator Alexis. Now, she told me, all right, I said, how do you pronounce the name? And she said, Pina Colada. Okay, Alexis Colada, who I will now call Senator Alexis, if that's okay. Is that all right? Thank you. From the great state of Florida, please welcome Senator, everybody. Thank you. Senator Linda Rogers. That one is easier, Linda. From the great state of Indiana. Yes. And Christy Wolf from Washington, D.C. Everybody excited about that? I've been joking with Christy about this. Christy is at the National Alliance for Public Charter Schools and is going to help us paint a picture for the national scene. And yes, maybe we'll talk a little bit about federal stuff because you might have noticed there was an election last week, and we might all be curious about what implications that has. But mostly we're going to talk about state policy. So let's get into that. Senator Alexis, Florida has been a leader on charter schools like so much else for a long time. Third largest state for charter enrollment in the country. Tell us a little bit about, where Florida is today and some of the policies that continue to drive forward on the charter front.
Sure. So we've evolved. Hey, everybody. I'm so grateful for the opportunity to share today. Florida has evolved from the time of Governor Bush to today, where the charter school issue is far less a partisan struggle. Most of the Democratic legislators in the Florida House and Senate have a child in a charter school. So it has truly become a choice conversation. What's best for you and your family? So the support that we have slowly inched and won in Florida over the last 25 years has come to a transformative apex where even within our funding structures, there is closer and closer to a place of parity and equity between our traditional public schools and our charter public schools. And we have real conversations about how public schools, traditional public schools, can learn from the innovation of charter schools, and had 3 massive education legislation bills filed last year, one in which I carried, in which we were trying to align public schools with some of the flexibility that has succeeded in creating better outcomes for students in public charter schools. So what we've done in Florida is seemingly transition from a place of charter schools are not best for our state, not best for our families, not best for our teachers, and we know that that's not the case. And at this point, we're trying to achieve closer to financial equity and parity. And we're also trying to blend the lessons of innovation that are happening widely in the public charter space into the traditional public space. And you're seeing districts like Miami-Dade County Public Schools trying to create their own internal versions of charter schools because of the enormous popularity, success, and parental choice that has now made charter schools so wildly popular. And that has been influencing directly legislators on the right and on the left in Florida to say this is an issue I will champion.
And help us, remind us in Florida how this works. You've obviously got these huge county-wide school systems, and those county systems are the charter school authorizer in most cases. So, in a lot of places, if it's the district that authorizes, that's just a no-starter, right? I live in Montgomery County, Maryland. They don't want charter schools. They are the only ones allowed to approve them. We don't have charter schools. But how does that work in Florida?
The charter school authorizer, or the relationship between a charter school sponsor, is now quite wide. So originally we had simply school districts that could authorize and sponsor charter schools, but now we have state universities, state colleges, cities, counties, and most recently we created an institute through the Department of Education that could also act as a sponsor. So there is a number of options, and what's really interesting is you even see, I would say, some areas that you'd consider Democratic strongholds in the state of Florida that are municipalities are becoming the sponsors for charter schools. You can see this in the part of Miami-Dade that doesn't turn red. It's truly breaking the boundaries of what is traditionally considered not just the sponsors, or rather the actors that refuse to be sponsors of new innovative charters in the area, but you have, in introducing new ways for sponsorships and authorizations to occur, you're finding new actors who otherwise you think might not be partners are the first in line to offer their buildings, to offer their space, to create public-private partnerships to make a charter school possible, and it becomes one of the most popular things within their administrations.
Great. I'm going to get to Senator Rogers in a moment. First, folks in the corner in the back, come on over. We've got plenty of seats over here if you want to sit down, so feel free. Okay, so Senator Rogers, tell us about Indiana. This is a state that, again, has been a leader in a lot of areas on school choice and charter schools, although it's a little bit in the middle of the pack when you look at the enrollment compared to, say, a place like Florida. But we were able to get through some very important pieces of legislation this year. Tell us about those.
Well, thank you, and good morning, everyone. It's wonderful to be with all of you. This year, we did have legislation that requires school corporations to share referendum dollars. And I think, as all of you know in this room, anytime you have legislation that promotes charter schools, it's not easy to get through. And so we were successful this year, and I credit it for 3 things. First, we have a great team. Secondly, is we gave school corporations something they would like. And then lastly, the data shows that charter schools are doing better. So when I talk about a great team, we have both in our Senate Education Committee, House Education Committee, we work in concert with each other. And we are also supportive of charter schools, at least on my side of the aisle anyway. And we have a great Secretary of Education, which we all saw this morning, Katie Jenner, and we all work together as a team. But also we have a number of organizations, and I see them in this room, and I hope I don't forget anybody, but we have, of course, ExcelinEd is there to help us. Hoosiers for Quality Education, the Mind Trust, Ed Choice, Stand for Children, Boys and Girls Club, and then my great friend Larry Garatoni, who operates some wonderful schools in South Bend. So as a team, we are able to work with the General Assembly to bring legislation through that are supportive of charters. Now, this year's legislation, it worked with the dollar law, and this is kind of a unique legislation, the dollar law. And what it is if a school corporation chooses to close a building, or if they are required to close a building, they have to offer that building to the charter school for $1. And of course, school corporations do not want to have charter schools in their area, so they will do anything to keep the building open. This year's legislation requires school corporations that if they have declining enrollment by 10% over 5 years, and the school building has less than 50% occupancy for 3 years, then that building will be required to close unless they do not have another grade level that the students can go to and they have the capacity, or if it's farther than 20 minutes. So what this does is it makes school corporations, they need to be fiscally responsible to the taxpayers, and the taxpayers paid for public education. So that's why a charter school should have that opportunity. So what the legislation did this year is it kind of clarified exactly those steps, but also it requires that if they do a referendum after May of 2023, they have to share with the charter school. And if they do, they no longer have to comply with the dollar law. So we gave them something that they would like, so it helped us get across the finish line. And then, of course, the data speaks for itself, how well they're doing. So it's not an easy task, but the great team we have in place, we're able to get things done.
Yeah, that's so fascinating. We're going to keep talking about this enrollment issue because it's obviously a huge one all over the place. And it sounds like a little bit of whack-a-mole here. I mean, on the one hand, this is a policy that I know the folks at ExcelinEd and a lot of us have always liked is if you have empty facilities, charters should have a first shot at it, maybe for free or for $1. But then you've created an incentive for them to do everything they can not to close under-enrolled schools, which is not great on the fiscal side. So trying to get that balance right. Why don't we keep going with that, Christy, and talk? I was going to ask you about some of the headwinds that charter schools are facing right now. This seems like one of them. I mean, everybody is starting to get serious about the fact that the enrollment cliff is here. It's only going to get worse thanks to the baby bust after the Great Recession. You know, my son is 17. His cohort, born in 2007, that was the peak of the more babies born in America than ever before, and then it just drops dramatically after that. So, that means our middle schools, our elementary schools are already shrinking nationally, right? This is going to put pressure on public schools, but it also puts pressure on charter schools, and it makes everything feel more like a zero-sum game. So how is that playing out around the country, Christy, and what else are we facing out there?
Yeah, so the enrollment cliff, as you put it, it is certainly looking at the nation as a whole an issue, but as we track our charter school enrollment on an annual basis, we're still measuring as a whole upticks. This year it was almost another 1 million students as the district population continues to decline. Now, your mileage will vary depending on which state you're in. If you're looking at Texas, Nevada, Florida, Arizona, and even North Carolina, you're going to see a lot of growth there continue just as the population continues to grow. But what I think is really interesting, and this is more like a tailwind, not a headwind, is that where charters have the ability to innovate and offer models of charters that are really aligned with what parents in that community want, we're still seeing growth. So would you be surprised to hear that we're still seeing significant growth in California? That was surprising to me. Well, they have a segment of their charter school population that are able to offer non-classroom based settings where you're in a school part of the week and at home part of the week. And that, even though they're actually capped right now in terms of the number of schools they can open, that growth is just growing phenomenally. New York City is continuing to grow despite the caps that are there. Now, overall, we would say, yeah, you need to get rid of those caps in order to have a thriving charter sector, but those are places, because of the innovation that's happening and the demand, you're still seeing growth. So I do think that the facilities issue in particular is it's a very stealthy way, and I think Patricia brought this up in the previous panel, that folks that want to shut down choice growth in general, and especially charter school growth, can do that, because it doesn't look anti-choice. It looks like, oh, we're protecting public assets, or we're making sure that we're good stewards of funds. California has tried to do this with just some tinkering with how they calculate their per pupil aid for facilities for charter schools. Thankfully, they've been able to push back on that. Thankfully, areas like in Colorado, where they tried to re-regulate that legislation didn't go anywhere.
And explain, what are they trying to do with the facilities? What are the opponents trying to do? Make it harder for charter schools to get access to facilities?
Yeah, whether it's in LA, where we're like, okay, we're going to end co-location. Charters going forward can't share a public building anymore. And so, given the number of empty buildings in LA, USD, it sounds like they're trying to protect public assets, but it's actually a pushback on charter school growth, because charters will no longer be able to access those buildings. And that was definitely colored the school board election there this fall. Other places they want to make it harder to issue bonds, or they want to make it harder to actually or reduce the amount of funding that a charter school is eligible for, or create more hoops for them to go through. And that has on an annual basis, some of these bills just come up in states like Colorado and California, and they have to beat them back. But then when you're playing defense, it's harder to play offense, and so that also stymies growth.
Okay, good. Hey, we're talking about putting butts in seats. Hey, people over here, we got a lot of seats over here. Come on over. It's driving me crazy. Come.
And I didn't say anything about the federal yet.
Yeah, we'll get there. Yeah. We'll get there. Yeah. We'll get there. All right. So facilities, a real pain point. Another pain point, of course, money. Okay. Now, Senator Rogers, I understand you had some big successes this year on that front too, or maybe in recent years, about getting charter schools access to local tax dollars. Tell us about that and how it works.
Well, currently, they are required to share referendum dollars with the charter school proportionately based on the number of students in each, whether it's the charter school or if it's the traditional public. However, in Indiana, the property tax dollars actually, without the referendum, they follow into that traditional public school. So right now, they do not share any of those dollars, and that discrepancy is about, on average, $4,000 a student. In some areas, it's up to $8,000 and $9,000, the difference. The state of Indiana does help a little bit with that by providing a charter school grant at the state level of $1,400 per student. So that is one thing that in Indiana we are aggressively working on, is to ensure that we can share those property tax dollars and that they follow the student. I've talked about this with so many folks because most people in the general public do not understand that if their child goes to a charter school, their property tax dollars are not helping to educate their child. Now, the state dollars do. All our state dollars follow the student. So we have a big hurdle, but we're not afraid of challenges, and we're going to continue to work on it.
Okay, got it. So there's been some progress, but still ways to go.
Right.
What do you say? I remember way back when some of us would make the case that said, oh, well, charter schools are going to be so much more effective and efficient for a variety of reasons. They're not going to have unions, or most of them won't, or they'll be more innovative, so we don't need as much money. We'll be able to get better results for less money. And now we're more making the case that says, no, we need the money. Like, we need funding equity. These kids are, all of our kids, and especially they serve a lot of poor and disadvantaged kids, they deserve to get funding. But, how do you, if people say to you, if the opponents say, oh, well, you're supposed to be able to get these great results with less money, like, how do you respond to that?
Well, that is what's happening today. You're getting better results with less money. But however, and I think of Purdue Polytech, I remember the students came and they spoke at a committee meeting, and they were phenomenal. And they said how much they love their school, but they don't have a gym. So, or they may not have bus transportation. So these are the things that, trying to get that equal access to different activities for these charter students, yet they still love their school and they are still doing better.
Yeah.
So it's just, and it's a matter of fairness.
Yeah. Yeah. Great. Okay, Senator Alexis, I want to ask about the Schools of Hope program in Florida. Mm-hmm. And I should say that this is an idea which the ExcelinEd folks are super excited about. And I forgot to say at the top, and I should, that they have a new website out called School Choice Matters. And it looks across the state at state policies. It's not a million state policies like some of the other rating systems, but a few of the most essential ones on charters and other forms of school choice to really promote high-quality charters. And one is to make it more feasible for high-quality charter management organizations from other states or within the same state to expand and replicate, right? That basically, if you're a great operator, you should have a streamlined way of opening new schools versus somebody who's never done it before, and so you need to have more oversight. So tell us how that works and how that's going.
We are so excited about the Schools of Hope program, and one of the gentlemen who refused to sit down when asked to sit down was actually one of the sponsors of policy for it, former State Representative Vance Lupus, and I served as his staff member when he worked on some of the Schools of Hope policy that Florida has, 2019. And so the Schools of Hope program is two pieces. One, it is eligibility, and so it allows the highest performing, the upper echelon of charter management companies, charter operators who work with at least 80% free and reduced lunch students, have an 80% college attendance rate after graduation, have historically overperformed every district or state assessment in the other states that they've operated in, and want to come and work with low-income students in opportunity zones in Florida, federal opportunity zones. So we've created both this criteria that allows them to come down and have access to both startup funding and facilities funding in a revolving loan fund that the legislature created, I think, at its inception, $40 million. We currently have 5 School of Hope operators that have been authorized in the state of Florida. Not all of them are yet in, and a piece of that is the facilities, right? Particularly in South Florida or our urban areas across the state. Real estate is just incredibly expensive. So there's additional conversations to be had on what the future of future Schools of Hope coming to Florida and expanding. They have to have multiple schools, multiple presences. But frankly, our goal is not just to proliferate the charter movement, which by charter has to have a certain performance measure, but every School of Hope operator has to meet this particular very high performance metric to continue their work in Florida.
All right, that's it's super exciting and great work. Yeah. So, kudos again. Check out School Choice Matters website. See, I'm doing it for you. All right, Senator Rogers, we talked about authorizing in Florida. Let's talk about it in Indiana a little bit. So, one of the ExcelinEd policy priorities is making sure that there are a number of authorizers in a given state. Again, we know if it's only the school districts allowed to do this, most school districts most of the time will say no. So how have you tackled that in Indiana?
Sure. Indiana has a very robust policy on authorizers, and they could be authorized by a 4-year public university, a 4-year private not-for-profit university. The mayor of Indianapolis, who actually has authorized 46 schools, the Indiana Charter School Board, and then an Indiana Public School Corporation. And as you mentioned, it's not usually very popular to do, and in Indiana we only have one school corporation that has authorized. So we have this huge number of opportunities. We actually have 8 now that authorize. The 4 that are really have 5 or more are Ball State University, Education One at Trine University, of course the mayor of Indianapolis, the Charter School Board. Those are the ones that really are doing a good job, and they have very strict requirements in order to authorize a school, and some get turned down. So each year we have maybe 3 to 5 new schools opening, and then we do have schools that will close because they're either not providing the educational quality they should, or they're not fiscally able to continue anymore. So.
Thank you. All right, Christy, let's talk about the federal stuff. I am curious. I'm going to take a little poll here, unscientific. Raise your hand if you think within the next 4 years the U.S. Department of Education will go away. All right, now that's interesting. A handful. Okay, yeah, some people. Christy, what's the right answer? Is it going away? Tell us. And what would that mean?
Right. So why do we care? What is that? How does that relate to charter schools? We're here talking about great state policies that are being enacted at the state level to increase charter schools and charter school growth, and see all the great things that are happening as a result. Well, one of the engines of the expansion of charter schools in the country, like the most significant one, is the federal charter schools program, which now provides up to $2 million per charter school to open and replicate high-quality charter schools. Indiana has a grant. Florida has a grant. And so that is really a critical ingredient to the expansion of school choice in the country, as well as addressing the facilities needs. So there's mechanisms within the program to provide per pupil aid on a facilities aid on a per pupil basis. Apologies for using shorthand. And then also to reduce the cost of financing new buildings through credit enhancement. We're also really excited. This is the first year that we've been able to get 2 grants out for the state's facilities incentive grant program. California has been the primary recipient since inception under George W. Bush, and demand had dwindled, and it was even capped by Congress in terms of the amount of funding, and we got that cap removed. And so now Colorado is now the recipient of that funding, as well as a brand new CSP grant. So really excited to see what Colorado will be doing with that. So how does that relate to potential proposals to shut down the Department of Education? So none of the proposals actually eliminate all of the programs at the Department of Ed. They're typically shifting the large formula grant program, so Title I aid to disadvantaged students, the funding stream that goes to the vast majority of public schools in the country, as well as a students IDEA, the aid for students with disabilities. They would be tucked away in other agencies, as well as student financial aid for higher education. And then generally, when folks are talking about this, all of the competitive grant programs, which would include the charter school programs, they just go away. Or there's another version of the proposal where they're all just put together in one giant block grant, which I think Jeb Bush was talking about this morning.
I think he did endorse that. Yes.
I'm sure he meant to keep the charter schools program separate from any large block grant. We don't have a lot of confidence in states choosing to direct those funds. The political pressure to not direct those funds to charter schools and opening new charter schools would be pretty strong, I think, in a lot of states. So that is one of our concerns, quite honestly, that Congress not go down that road of putting the charter schools program, which is a unique program. You get it for a short period of time, and then you're on your way as a charter school getting your state aid. Instead, we would like to continue to use that program to grow the charter school movement, increase facilities aid, and also incentivize good state policy. I don't always like using the word incentivize, but the program right now it prioritizes states that are doing great things on facilities, that have multiple authorizers, that don't have caps. So those are important safeguards we see as waving the banner of what does good charter school policy look like.
All right, great. And I think it is fair to say that the conventional wisdom is what this room showed, right? Which is that most of us think it probably is unlikely that they will succeed in getting rid of the Department of Education. It would take an act of Congress. It's very unpopular. I saw a poll, 20% support the idea of getting rid of the U.S. Department of Education. So it would be a tough vote probably for even a lot of Republicans to take. But who knows, right? I mean, I didn't think Matt Gaetz was going to be nominated to be the Attorney General yesterday. So who knows? Well, what do I know?
But that didn't take an act of Congress, not yet.
What's that? Okay, that does take an act of Congress. Well, unless they go into recess. Okay. back to charter schools. Yeah, so we'll see. And the same thing about, dramatic cuts to funding. I mean, maybe, but again, very unpopular. So probably not. But this question of, you do now have trifecta control with Republicans in Washington. So, I mean, is there hope, Christy, that the charter school program funding could go up? I mean, it's been pretty flat now in the Biden years. Is there good news on the way, maybe, for charter advocates?
Well, I'm going to take a cue from someone's piece this morning on the silver lining for the red wave that maybe unlike the first Trump administration, we will see a strengthening of our bipartisan coalition for charter schools that we see in Congress, and that we have seen in the last couple of years Democrats and Republicans really wanting to support some of the legislation that we've been pushing. We have a Senate bill to offer $100,000 pre-planning grants to open a new charter schools designated for educators especially. And we have 4 Democratic senators and 4 Republicans that came together on that. So I'm hoping that because of the margins, especially in the House, that aren't going to be great, that there'll be an incentive to demonstrate a commitment to public school choice that will really the CSP has not been increased since the Obama administration. And so we're looking for more funds and more flexibility for that program, and I'm hopeful that folks will come together for that.
No, that's great. Of course, I think a lot of us are hopeful that, because some of those deep blue cities shifted so much to the right in this election, that might be a bit of a wake-up call, and maybe some Democrats will argue, hey, we've got to go back after these voters, and in part by offering school choice, which is very popular in a lot of those communities. So, here's hoping. All right, I want to go a little off script, back to the senators, but Christy, we can get you in here too, and talk about the larger picture with school choice and charter schools. Obviously there is this enthusiasm around education savings accounts and expanding school choice to be universal or near universal. So now Florida and Indiana have these universal programs for private school choice. And there's some people in the charter community that are worried that that's going to take kids and market share and attention and money away from the charter schools. What's happening on the ground? I'm curious. I know it's early days in some cases, but what are we seeing? Is it creating some of that zero-sum thinking? Or Senator Alexis, tell us what it looks like in Florida and Miami.
We certainly have a lot of excitement over the universal vouchers. We had, up to this point in Florida, before this past legislative session, a very high threshold of income eligibility. Mm-hmm. So when we've transitioned from, I believe it was 350% of federal poverty level to universal, we do have some new individuals, some new families coming in and participating within the ESA program, the voucher programs. But we also have a really robust system of special needs scholarships, and really 5 in total in Florida, in addition to the universal voucher. My philosophy, and I think that of the legislature, as we're observing what happens post-policy during implementation, is that we believe in parental choice. And so if our belief is that parents should have the choice of traditional public or a magnet public or a public charter or private, no one can have the attitude of a zero-sum game. Yeah. It's not applicable for some and unapplicable for others. So the same market of competitiveness and of high-quality programs, this is why funding really matters in creating that equity and parity. We want our parents to have the best opportunity to give their kid a shot to express their potential. And so while all of these other policies underlie how this is not a zero-sum game, we go back to that to say we want the most innovative, exciting programs, whether that's in the private system, whether that's in a public charter, or whether that's wonderful innovation in our traditional public schools, which my district is a great example of, and I have a school board member here that is a part of that innovation. Shout out to Board Member Santos. The important thing is that we continue the narrative. There are no zero-sum games in school choice, and we create the appropriate funding structures to make that true.
And appropriate funding meaning as much, as equitable as possible. So, for example, that a lot of places it's like, okay, the districts are way up here, and then the charters, and then the private school, and you're trying to say, let's try to make that all more similar.
Because it's about every single child, regardless of outcome, regardless of income of the family, having the true choice.
Okay.
And we have to fight back against the zero-sum narrative by the policy that doubles down on our value structure of that.
Yep, fantastic. Okay, Senator Rogers, same thing in Indiana. What are you saying?
Well, thank you. In Indiana, we are nearly universal voucher, hoping that this year we will finally take off any income limits, and so every parent has that opportunity. It's so important because that's what parents want. They want to have choices. And they may have a child that goes to a traditional public, a charter school, and a private. It's whatever is best for that child, and that's what parents really want. And so as far as ESAs in Indiana, I see us moving in that direction. Right now, we have a limited budget for ESAs, and those ESAs are for those that are handicapped students so that the parents can get the additional training that child needs. We will probably open that up more this year because it's so important. And parents really want that. And I think the hardest part is controlling the narrative because you're hearing all the negative things that are not true. And so we have to continue to promote and explain why it's important. So I think that's the biggest problem that we have in Indiana is controlling that narrative.
Yeah. And I assume, tell me if this is wrong, I mean, I know Florida, has had this incredible robust population growth and still is in most parts, right? Indiana, I assume less so. So, I mean, there's going to be more discussions around school closures and enrollment declines. I mean, that makes it tougher, right? I mean,
it doesn't make it hard, and I think it's important to recognize that school corporations need to be responsible to their taxpayers. And if they have a building that they're not using to its potential, let's consolidate and work together. And I think when property tax dollars start following the child, what will happen is that they will decide we have to close buildings. And that way they're spending money on what they really need to. Those are the educators.
Yeah.
And making sure, because we have to look at what's number one, and that is providing the best quality education we can for our children.
Yeah.
And if I can add, I mean, while Florida does have net migration increase, that doesn't mean it's children.
Okay.
And that doesn't mean that
interesting, yeah.
That doesn't mean that the families or the individuals coming are having more children. So generally, the decline of the birth rate is affecting us, and it takes all the systems, right? The traditional public charter. So it's a deep question too. You might have within one school district enormous growth in one particular part of the community where it might be a lower cost of living and families can afford to live there, but maybe on half of the rest of the district you're experiencing increasing reduction of butts and seats. You have 20%, 30% of a school building empty. So I think these are really challenges that are complex, because you could even see that within a charter management company operator where they could say half of my portfolio is a quarter empty. But then I have another area where I can't have enough, I can't find enough classrooms. Right. So this is just a dynamic time for education, even in states that are receiving enormous influx of individuals. I think even as Governor Bush mentioned, why aren't people getting married earlier? Why aren't they having more babies? I think the bottom line is it's expensive. But we're feeling that geographically within communities themselves. And we're going to have to find ways for every node in the network of school choice to find ways to be innovative, to contract, to expand. And as policymakers, we're going to have to become so much more iterative to support whatever the new vision is for each of these segments of education.
Yeah, and in some of these states with the education savings accounts, I know there's a lot of enthusiasm that maybe, say, a charter school that's not full, but could use some of that building to maybe serve some homeschool kids for part of the day with their ESA, or to, right? I mean, how can we piece and mix and match and unbundle? Christy, you've got new leadership at the National Alliance. Starlee Coleman, who headed the Texas Association for Charters and is now heading the National Alliance. And I'm just curious, I mean, you've got this challenge. You think about the whole country. You've got people that are on, red and blue and purple. And, how do you think about this challenge, particularly with the entrance of the education savings accounts, the universal school choice? Is that causing consternation within some people in the charter movement? How do you navigate that?
Yeah, I think I count myself as one of the people that's very optimistic that more choice is a good thing, but I think it also provides opportunities to highlight how there's been regulatory creep on charter schools since their inception. And so if folks are looking to open private schools under an ESA model because they're able to be more innovative, what obstacles need to be removed so that charter operators are able to tailor the education for their students in the way that they want to. That's where there's a bit of a mismatch. We've had, I heard from a model, one of the non-classroom based charter models in California that wanted to open in Tennessee, and you can't run that kind of charter school here where you're at home and then in the building. Like, what is that? You have to be all one thing. So that I think is going to push folks who are at the forefront of innovation to maybe not consider the charter school model. I think from our perspective, rather than just at a policy level, at a state level, saying, okay, are we going to do ESAs like those other states? Like, take a step back. Okay, let's look at our charter school law. How can we leverage what we already have in a sector that's already in our state to provide more opportunities for customization? And the name of charter schools is all about accountability. And so there's so many opportunities that can be leveraged within charter land, as we say sometimes, that I think folks can get distracted from just looking at the ESA model. Not that that's bad, or that there's not opportunities there as well, but there's not a policy zero sum. And so let's look at how we can integrate some of these ideas of parent-directed spending in the charter context.
All right, great. Okay, hey, I want to get all of you into this conversation. There's a microphone up here, so if you could please make your way over to it, unless, Matthew, you want to try to get it around to people, but maybe, we'll go to the microphone. Great.
I'm Julie Mosley from Rocky Bayou Christian School, very blessed to be in the state of Florida. We have students come to us now with the universal choice, but our local superintendent is very pleased with us because he still gets money for those students that we are teaching. Is that true for the charter schools as well? Because we have two very robust charter schools in our section of Canada.
You want to see if that's on? Yeah.
Sorry about that. Okay, so I'm from Rocky Bayou Christian School in the Panhandle of Florida. We love Florida. And our local superintendent of the schools, the public schools, loves us. We love him because he still gets money for every student we teach. Is that also true for the great charter schools in our area? And
right.
Maybe
So,
does that help?
Meaning that if a child moves from the public schools to your school, the local money doesn't come with them, so they still have that local
Correct.
money in their own schools.
And does that work the same for charters is my question.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question, and thank you for the work you do for our kids. So, to my understanding, and there may have been been some sort of hold harmless. So I'm not quite sure with the transition to universal voucher. But how students are funded in Florida is by full-time enrolled, and so what we've provided for the education saving accounts doesn't pass through for the private school doesn't pass through the FEFP, the Florida Education Finance Program. And so charter schools and traditional public school students run as a full-time enrolled, it's counted as one. And they run through that formula, and they receive base student allocation, which increases every year, and they receive categorical funding. For us, that's a plethora. I think it's like 10. It goes from mental health and school safety all the way to reading interventions and additional supports. And so then that child goes through that, and we count that, and we provide that to charter schools, and that is a mix of state funding, but then like a charter school will also receive local funding. They'll be pushed through all the same systems as a traditional public child, which now includes capital outlay because of policy of 2 years ago. To my understanding, though, a private school student is not counted within that because they are out of that system, particularly if they're receiving an education savings account. They are actively being counted within the education savings account formula. So there is a line between that. In terms of capital outlay funding and local referendum money, the state of Florida has now required greater sharing between traditional public and charter public. So now there's greater parity there. But essentially, our children are added as full-time enrolled through whichever process they're eligible for. If they're not receiving a voucher at all or an ESA account at all, a scholarship, they're not within any of these.
Interesting. And, there is an interesting political dynamic, right? Because for most of Charterland's history, Charterland, the local money in most places didn't follow the child. And so, in effect, when the opponents would say, you're taking money away from the public schools, it wasn't true, right? It was like, no, you actually have more money per pupil now because, okay, the state money moved, but the local money stayed. If you succeed, though, in getting more of the local money to move, then it starts to be a little more true that the money is leaving the traditional public schools, right? It does create, so just something to keep an eye on. Terry Ryan.
Mike Petrelli, it's good to see you.
Likewise, my friend.
Where it's all about the kids, but here we talk about money, and my question is about the money. So I'm helping to build public charter schools in Idaho, and our schools the money all have strings attached to them, how you can spend the money. You have to spend money on a certain number of teachers, and there's the career ladders, and there's all these things. So as a matter of fairness, if you're going to issue money for private education and there are no strings attached, I would make a plea, I guess as a question, is anybody doing this in states to say, how do we free up our public charters or our districts so that they can maximize how they staff their schools? They can think very differently about this. That seems to have a transformative effect. Otherwise, it's kind of like being in a football game where you have different rules for one team and different rules for the other, and one has to run around with weights around their ankles while the others don't. So how's that conversation starting to develop?
Yeah, so let's talk in particular with charter schools. I mean, Christy mentioned the creeping regulation over time. So have there been some efforts that we can point to that have been successful in trying to do the whack-a-mole thing and push some of those regulations back down?
Well, I know in Indiana we've been trying to deregulate, which is not an easy task because there's an organization that says we've been doing it this way for a long time and we want to keep doing it that way. So we are working on trying to deregulate. When it comes to the state money, schools are required to spend at least 2/3 of their funds on their certificated staff or the teachers. They have to spend it. And 85% has to be spent on education. So if you go over or go under that, then they get put on this list, which a lot of schools don't really like. But we want to make sure that the dollars are going to the education quality of the students, and so they're going to the teachers.
And Alexis, I assume you hear these complaints from charter schools in Florida also, right? The private schools have very little light regulation. We have to deal with a lot. What are some ways to help them?
It's mostly by trying to understand and listen regionally. In Florida, we even have different building codes, for example. South Florida has some of the most robust and expensive building codes in the country. So if you're building a charter school in South Florida versus the Panhandle, for example, it'll cost $75,000, $100,000 less. So when we talk about deregulation, it's so much an item-by-item collaborative effort with our charter school managers and charter school operators to understand what is actually cumbersome. And this past legislative session, I mentioned we had public education deregulation, in which we tried to understand what were the deregulated elements that public charters enjoyed, that the traditional public system could benefit from and could be more innovative, be more nimble to support students if we reduce those burdens for them. But what we have in Florida is a very robust conversation constantly with charter school leaders for them to let us know what is a particular burdensome element, and how in a very dynamic, expensive market that is Florida and South Florida, particularly with all the hurricanes, all the challenges we have, the enormous amount of student movement, how can we make it work? So I don't think the true answer is not, what have we already done, but session by session we are approached by new ideas, and the question of which one is truly a systemic approach to making the work of expanding serving students possible.
Yep. Right. Okay. Great. Yes.
Dr. Audrey Young, Texas State Board of Education. However, I just retired from 30 years of public education. My first 11 years were in the state of Florida under Jeb Bush, and I taught Representative Kaylee Tuck. Wow. Who passed House Bill 1 for the ESAs in this last legislative session in Florida. So I'm in a very unique position here. And so I just wanted you to touch a little bit more on how the money actually follows the children in the state of Florida, because Florida does something that a lot of other states don't do, and that is they do a PEMS count twice a year, a snapshot twice a year. So if you could tell everyone in here a little bit about that, because I think that helps with public school understanding, with charters in the public school arena, as well as in the private sector as well.
Absolutely. So, and I'm so lucky that before I became a senator, I worked at the Department of Education, or I wouldn't know that answer. So what we do in Florida is we take snapshots of the butts and seats, who is in the classroom in each school district, in each school. And then what we do during the legislative session is host an estimating conference to understand what the fiscal impact would be, projected on exactly the students that we had last, and then if we potentially add a growth factor to that. We enter into legislative session with the governor's recommendation of what he would like the education budget to be. So Governor DeSantis is a fierce advocate for education. And every year he has been governor, he has proposed hundreds of millions of dollars increase to the education budget, at least a $250 million a year increase to teacher salary allocation. But every single categorical within our funding structure has been increased. The base student allocation has been increased every single year. So we start off with the governor's recommended budget, and then the legislature likes to one-up it and then add $10 million more for mental health, $20 million more for school safety. Obviously, after Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, we take those elements really seriously in Florida. And so, as I mentioned, we have truly three. It's probably more, but being general, we have three funding structures, and some of the scholarship money does push through the FP, and it has caps. Right now, we have a cap on our special needs students with disabilities program, but it's pretty high. We have our traditional public and public charter system, in which it's called the Florida Education Finance Program, that has all of these different components in which the full-time enrolled student passes through, and then they receive cluck, all of the different bits of money that they generate. On top of that, we have weights for additional values that student might have earned or might be eligible for. And those weights are added to the full-time enrolled number. And so the school will then receive that, and we hope to have the most accurate depiction both of the need and of the increased investment that the state legislature add to each school district. And you have a calculation by near the end of session on approximately where you're at. We've recently had several cost of living increases. Like, I advocate every year for, a 3 to 6% increase for Miami-Dade County public schools, because it's more expensive to operate. But we receive that through the charter school funding too. And then the ESA accounts, 2 years ago, we added $1 billion specifically for that. So we have all these pass-throughs and funding. And I'm sorry, it's not a Florida funding conversation.
It's amazing. Yeah.
But that's how we have structured our funding, and it's a conversation that we revisit probably every 7 to 10 years if there's any major tweaks we should make to the finance program. And that's not even touching early learning, which I think we should have a birth through 20 system, but in true financial form. But that's how we structure our funding to make sure that there is charter equity, and that there is no zero-sum game within our voucher ESA program and our entire public system, traditional and charter.
Great.
So that snapshot happens twice a year, is that correct? Once in the fall, in October, once in the spring again. And so where the student is at in that particular district, or school system, that's where that funding goes for that semester. If that student is there in that same school system, the money shows up the second semester if they're in that same snapshot. If they are not in that county or in that district, the money goes to wherever the student is in that county or district. And that is something different than most other states do, because the money truly follows the child. And
to do it twice a year instead of just once. Yeah,
that is correct.
That's great. All right, thank you very much. All right, gang, we're going to start wrapping up. We have covered a lot of ground. And again, the School Choice Matters website that the ExcelinEd folks put out, touches on a couple of these big issues, right? It's around charter funding equity, super important. Charter authorizers, making sure that there's, high quality charter authorizers out there, not just the districts, to do this important work. And then the deregulation piece. We've talked about some of that stuff. The facilities, we didn't get to it, but in Texas they have a cool policy, it sounds like, to say, hey, you local zoning people, you can't put facility zones on charters that you don't have for traditional public schools. I mean, those kinds of things to really try to level the playing field and make sure that the charter promise of accountability and autonomy is still there. So again, check it out. Why don't we go down the line here and just say, what are some things, what's next? What are some things nationally or in your states that you're really excited about to kind of keep the charter policy movement going forward? Christy, start with you.
Yeah, so we're excited to see what will happen at the state and federal level going forward. My work is particularly more settled around the federal side, so I'm excited to see if we can get that increased funding and additional flexibility in the program, more funding for facilities. Also, as part of our policy work at the National Alliance we're creating similar tools to what ExcelinEd has done, just going deeper on the charter policy, on facilities, on finance, on growth in particular, to try to help states understand where they are, not just with the policy on the books, but the outcomes. So you can say that you're doing X, Y, Z and point to it on the law, but is it actually changing facilities access for charter schools? So we're excited to roll that out later this year. Happy to answer any questions about that.
Okay, great. Senator Rogers?
Well, thank you. In Indiana, we every year move forward with additional policies that are helpful to charters. The areas that we're still working on is the local tax dollars following the student. I think that's one thing that we have to look at. The other is providing opportunities for charter schools for capital. That's a very difficult part, and I'm anxious to talk to you and hear more about your program. But they need to be able to have additional capital, because you might say, why don't we have more charter schools? It's expensive. It is very expensive to start a charter school, and they need the opportunity and the access to capital to keep going. And then also, when it comes to traditional public, looking for them to right size and be able to, instead of spending money on trying to keep a school that is not operating at capacity, and we have schools that operate at 40% capacity, or they will try to use them for storage. And so operating and right-sizing makes each school more fiscally responsible. And so the money, instead of spent on buildings, is being spent on students.
Okay, great. Senator Alexis?
I think that last element you discussed, I'm really excited about. The question of how do we support the entirety of the education system, but our public schools, traditional and charter, understand how to move dynamically within a very expensive market. Where's the work that we can have collaboratively for more co-location opportunities, more utilization of educational space together? In South Florida, we talk a lot about what's the transition of educational space or vacant space or underutilized space for workforce housing for public school teachers. So there's a lot of questions on what are the inputs that could make our educational system function. Because I know it's not particularly on topic, but in addition to the question of how are we going to help charter schools move forward and continue, how are we going to help them keep their teachers? And particularly the urban settings you mentioned, which have been so popular, so dynamic, so successful for student outcomes. How are their teachers living? So I'm really interested in how we can work through some of those maybe periphery issues that will affect the quality of education as well. And charters are having some of the same challenges our traditional public friends are dealing with in terms of teacher recruitment and retention.
All right, please join me in thanking our wonderful panel.